Welcome to the debate. Have you ever looked at a child playing, completely carefree, and felt a deep, aching jealousy? They don't know about bills, burnout, or mortality yet. They are still in the garden. Tonight, we explore the darkest psychological truth of the Bible. The apple wasn't a sin. It was adulthood.
It really is. It's the ultimate psychological allegory, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Because we're looking at a framework where the Garden of Eden isn't literal history. It's a perfect mirror for human development. According to this reading, the garden represents childhood.
Right, that state of unconscious innocence.
Exactly. That absolute safety where every single need is provided for by a higher power, which, in a child's world is simply their parents.
Precisely. And eating the fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil represents the painful, irreversible psychological awakening of human consciousness.
Yeah.
The resulting exile is the unavoidable entry into adulthood. I take the philosophical position here. I argue that eating the apple, gaining this consciousness, is a tragic but beautiful necessity. It is literally the only way we become fully human.
And I look at this through a sociological lens, because I argue that the structures we've built in the modern world have turned that psychological exile into an unbearable, lifelong treadmill, rather than, a beautiful awakening.
Well, let's dive right into the mechanics of this awakening, because we need to understand what it actually means to, quote-unquote, eat the apple.
Right. What does that look like in practice?
When we talk about gaining the knowledge of good and evil, we are talking about the precise developmental moment a person realizes their own mortality and their profound vulnerabilities. Think about what's actually happening in the brain.
Oh, you mean around age 4 or 5?
Yes, the prefrontal cortex really starts coming online. That is the biological equivalent of taking that first bite.
Right, because you suddenly have the capacity for long-term planning. You can actually project yourself into the future.
Precisely, which means you have the capacity for existential dread. You realize tomorrow exists, which means a day will come when tomorrow doesn't exist.
It's a heavy burden for a kid.
It is. The source material highlights the realization of nakedness as the supreme symbol of this. Before the apple, the child is naked but feels no shame, no fear. They are protected by a bubble of unconscious innocence.
Yeah, a scraped knee hurts, sure, but they don't understand that they're fundamentally fragile creatures.
Exactly. But the bite of the apple shatters that bubble. Suddenly, the harsh moral complexities of the world just rush in.
It's a brutal realization. You are essentially evicted from paradise just because you woke up.
It is painful, yes, but I see why you think that, and let me give you a different perspective.
Okay.
If we never realized we were naked or vulnerable, wouldn't our existence remain entirely shallow? Much like a beautiful but static painting.
I mean, how so?
Well, without the agonizing knowledge of our own mortality, we literally cannot build empathy. Because until you realize that you are fragile and finite, you are incapable of recognizing that fragility in the person sitting across from you. Empathy requires shared vulnerability.
Okay, I follow the logic there.
If we never understood death, our existence would remain shallow. We couldn't create profound art. We couldn't love deeply, because to truly love someone is to understand the terrifying reality that you might lose them. So the departure from the garden isn't a divine punishment. It is a beautiful necessity. We trade safety for death.
Wait, I have to stop you there.
Go ahead.
I come at it from a different way. You're romanticizing the ticking clock.
Am I?
Yeah, I think you are. The theoretical beauty of that transition might hold up in a philosophical vacuum, but we do not live in a vacuum. We live in a highly structured, hyper-capitalist reality.
Well, sure, but
The narrative of exile in the modern world is not simply a quiet, philosophical awakening under a tree where we get to sit around writing poetry about our shared fragility. It's a brutal severing from childhood wonder that drops us squarely into systemic burnout.
But this psychological awakening happens regardless of the economic system.
It happens, yes, but look at how it is hijacked. We lose the safety of the garden, the protection of that higher power, and instead of being given the time and space to navigate those moral complexities you describe, we are handed crushing financial responsibilities.
Responsibilities are just part of life, though.
Right, but if you're listening to this on your commute right now, you know exactly what this feels like. You are in the exile we're talking about. The tragedy isn't just that we have to work.
What is the tragedy then?
It's the psychological betrayal of the modern world. We are trading unconscious innocence not for depth, but for a lifetime of panic and monetized survival.
I see the exhaustion you're pointing to. I really do. But are you saying the system negates the value of the consciousness itself?
I'm saying it distorts it.
Think about the child in the garden. They are safe, yes, but they are also essentially a pet to the higher power. They completely lack agency. The realization of mortality, even when it's compounded by bills and commutes, is the very thing that gives human life its sovereign meaning.
But what does that agency actually look like in practice? You say the child has no agency because the parents provide everything. I look at the modern adult and ask, well, what agency do they have?
They get to make their own choices.
Do they really? The economy demands all their time and energy just to secure basic survival. You're subscribing to a lifelong anxiety. The ticking clock you mentioned earlier isn't a reminder to love your neighbor more deeply.
I think it can be.
But for most, it's an alarm clock waking you up for a commute you despise, to do a job that drains you, to pay bills that never stop coming.
That's a cynical reading of the modern struggle, though. Even if that bond is forged in the fires of a stressful commute or financial hardship, the depth of human connection that arises from shared struggle is real.
But does it bring us together?
The allegory of the garden and the sweat of the brow predates modern capitalism by millennia. The agony of the exile is intrinsic to the human condition. The realization that you must secure your own survival is what forces a human being to look at another human being and recognize mutual dependence.
But that shared vulnerability doesn't actually bring us together, does it? Look at what people actually do when they realize they're vulnerable in our modern framework. They don't turn toward each other in a grand, empathetic embrace.
Some definitely do.
Maybe some, but mostly they isolate. They build walls. And this brings us to one of the most fascinating points in the source material, the concept of the artificial Eden.
The attempt to recreate the garden.
Exactly. We are so terrified by the vulnerability of being naked outside the garden that we spend 40 years obsessively trying to replace the higher power that once provided for us.
We want to feel safe again.
Right, we try to buy our way back in. We build wealth. We retreat into gated communities. We hoard retirement funds. We chase promotions.
True.
These are not the actions of people ascending to a higher philosophical maturity, embracing their vulnerability. These are the desperate, exhausting actions of traumatized exiles trying to reconstruct a womb that no longer exists. The modern world promises us we can buy our way back into Eden, but it constantly moves the goalposts.
That's an interesting point, though I would frame it differently.
How so?
Well, sure, building a retirement fund takes resilience. And yes, it's driven by a desire for security. But at what psychological cost? I would argue that stepping into that provider role, becoming the one who builds the walls, is a profound form of sovereignty.
Okay, but it's fueled by panic.
Isn't the very act of building these artificial Edens, striving for a secure home, a testament to human strength? Yes, we are attempting to recreate safety, but by taking on the role of the higher power ourselves, we achieve a maturity that childhood could never offer.
We just swap roles.
We become the providers. We become the architects of the garden for the next generation. That is a profound evolution. It takes immense courage to look at the terrifying complexities of the world, to feel the terror of your own mortality, and decide to build a sanctuary anyway.
I hear that. I do. There is a certain nobility in becoming the provider. But let's dissect the exact psychological difference between the sanctuary of childhood and the sanctuary of adulthood.
All right.
The material specifies that the original garden represents a state of absolute, unconditional safety. When you are a child, you don't worry about the macroeconomic factors affecting the dinner table. Food simply appears because the parent, the higher power, wills it.
Right.
When we try to recreate that through a 401k or a gated community, that safety is inherently conditional.
Well, because it relies on systems outside our control.
Exactly. A retirement fund can crash. A gated community can be breached.
A job can be lost in a round of corporate layoffs. The artificial Edens we spend our lives building are incredibly fragile facsimiles of the original psychological state.
They are fragile, yes.
It's a numerical representation of safety, not an actual one. So we are running on a treadmill, chasing a horizon we can never reach, because the modern system keeps moving the line for what constitutes secure. You never actually feel arrived.
You're just perpetually striving.
Perpetually striving and perpetually exhausted, trying to satisfy an impossible standard of safety that was hardwired into you when you were a toddler.
The exhaustion is real, I grant you that. The conditional nature of our adult safety is terrifying, but I want us to look closely at why we keep running anyway.
Because we have to survive.
Because it points back to the mechanism of the consciousness itself. The exile is mandatory. Human consciousness is a one-way street. And I think this is where our perspectives, as different as they are, really begin to converge.
Yeah.
The material makes it brutally clear. The exile from Eden is the inescapable entry into adulthood.
Yes, there is a chilling finality to it. It's an existential eviction. Once you taste the apple, once that psychological awakening occurs and your prefrontal cortex lights up and you understand time, consequence, and death, the gates of the garden are locked forever.
You can never go back. You cannot unknow the concept of mortality. You cannot unsee your own vulnerabilities or the vulnerabilities of those you love.
No, you can't.
If you try to regress, if you try to act like a child who isn't responsible for their own survival, the world simply crushes you.
And you cannot unlearn the weight of responsibilities, taxes, and societal expectations. The moment that realization hits, the unconscious innocence is entirely vaporized. You might look at a child playing and feel that deep, aching jealousy precisely because you know something they don't.
You know the truth.
You know that the safety they are experiencing is a beautiful illusion. It's an illusion maintained by the adults around them, adults who are themselves bearing the crushing weight of the outside world, just standing guard at the edges of the playground.
Ignorance is bliss, but awareness is an inescapable, permanent burden. The material forces to recognize that there is no reverting to an unfallen state.
It's impossible.
Even if someone were to abandon the modern grind entirely, if they were to walk away from the pursuit of wealth, leave the gated community, and live entirely off the grid, they still possess the knowledge of good and evil.
Right.
They still possess the psychological awareness of their own finite nature. The burden of consciousness remains intact whether you are in a high-rise office or a cabin in the woods.
Which is exactly why the exile is so universally devastating. The allegory perfectly captures the trauma of growing up. We are cast out of paradise not because we did something maliciously evil, but simply because we woke up.
We just grew into our consciousness.
And the punishment for waking up is the lifelong requirement to navigate a world that is fundamentally indifferent to our survival. We are forced to expend massive amounts of energy just to create a tiny, fragile bubble of security in a vast, chaotic universe.
And yet, within that fragile bubble, we find the capacity to understand each other in a way no child ever could.
Well, hopefully we do.
We find the ability to look at another person, recognize the tragedy of our shared condition, and choose to extend grace. As we draw this debate to a close, I maintain my stance. The departure from the absolute safety of childhood is the necessary, beautiful price of consciousness.
I hear you.
The psychological awakening, painful as it is, transforms us from passive receivers of safety into active, empathetic participants in the human experience. The burden of knowing about mortality and vulnerability is precisely the mechanism that elevates our existence into something profound.
And I maintain my stance that, while the biological awakening is inevitable, the modern socio-economic reality turns this profound transition into an overwhelming, lifelong struggle. We are cast out of childhood innocence only to be placed onto a relentless treadmill.
The artificial Edens.
Yes, spending the rest of our lives working to exhaustion to recreate a lost sanctuary through highly conditional artificial Edens. The burden we carry today is less a noble philosophical weight and more a crushing systemic reality that profits off our existential panic.
There is a profound, lingering tension here between the sublime beauty of consciousness and the crushing weight of modern existence. Viewing human development through this ancient allegory not as literal history, but as a deeply psychological mirror for our evolution, it really helps us understand the universal grief of growing up.
It absolutely does. It gives vocabulary to a mourning we all experience but rarely articulate.
Exactly.
The story of Eden is incredibly durable because it perfectly maps onto the psychological reality of every single human being who has ever had to leave childhood behind. There are countless more psychological layers to explore in these foundational stories, far beyond what we've touched on today.
The next time you feel overwhelmed by the weight of your life, remember, you aren't being punished. You are just awake. Welcome outside the gates.